Well, hello and welcome to OKC SQL. My name is Alex Ayon, and I'm here to talk about UDFs, USPs, and views. So I'm a fairly new developer at my consulting, and I'm fairly new to SQL as well. So when I first heard these terms, I was a little confused, like what is a UDF, what is a USP, what is a view? I'm sure most of you here know that, but at the time I didn't, and still to this day I don't know. So we'll go into that. So if you're brand new like me, I'm going to recommend a couple resources. So you can go to GitHub, Microsoft's GitHub. They have an AdventureWorks database that you can kind of explore and play with. And in order to do so, you're going to have to download SSMS, stands for SQL Server Management Studio, and I provided a link there. It's sort of an IDE for SQL databases. Kind of lets you explore tables, views, functions, all those objects in there. And I would also recommend to download Visual Studio because it installs SQL Server Express. It comes along for the ride, and that way you have a SQL Server installed on your computer, which you will need. So what is a UDF? A UDF stands for a user-defined function. It's a function that you as a user create, and it lives in your database. There are also a bunch of built-in functions that are available from the system, like getDate, which gets you the current date, dateDiff, which gives you the date difference between two dates, AABS, which stands for absolute, which gives you the absolute value of a number. UDFs accept input parameters, and they can either return a scalar, which is a single value, or they can return a table. And so let me show you in SSMS what it would take to create a UDF. So ignore everything between if and go. That's just sort of, if there's a function there, it's going to drop it, because otherwise there would be an error. But to create a UDF, you issue the command create function, and then you give it a name. They accept parameters. In SQL, the @ symbol, and then the string stands for an input parameter. And you have to specify the type. Here it's an integer. And you have to tell it what it returns. It's either going to return a scalar or it's going to return a table. In this case, it just returns an integer. And then everything between begin and end is your UDF. So in order to use a UDF, once you've defined it, you just use the name to call it, and you give it an input parameter. So those are UDFs. Let's see, we might be able to run it. So I highlighted everything between 80 and -- using the UDF, and I had my F5 key. I got to connect to my database. And it says it's an invalid object name. Why? This happens all the time. You got to go over here and select your database. That happens to me all the time. It will happen to you too. So now that I've selected the database that I want to call this function on, because like I said, the UDF lives in that database, I should be able to call the function, and it should be able to return a value. So I'm just going to hit execute. That's another way of calling that function. And can't find it. So it means I don't have one. Well, that's okay. I'm going to instantiate it. And then I'm going to run it. Hey, I got a table back. So those are UDFs. Cool. So what is a USP? It stands for a user-defined stored procedure. And a stored procedure in SQL Server is a group of statements. And they can resemble constructs in other programming languages. That's sort of like kind of like a function. But they actually have effects. USPs don't necessarily have to return anything, but they can. And what do these two UDFs, USPs, what do they have in common? They're both stored in your database. This means the SQL statements don't have to come across the network. They reduce network traffic. because the actions are taking place in the SQL Server, so you just get a result back. You don't have to keep communicating with the SQL Server and sending in commands. So those are some of the similarities, some of the differences. I've highlighted stuff that I know for sure are big deals to me. User-defined functions return a value. Stored procedures don't necessarily have to. UDFs can only have input parameters. Stored procedures can have input and output parameters. And the list goes on and on. But I'm going to move on to views because we're on a time crunch. So a view is a virtual table whose contents are defined by a query. They act like a filter on the underlying tables that are being referenced. And they're used to focus and simplify data, in my opinion. And I can sort of show in SSMS what a view looks like, an example of a view and how you would create one. To create a view, you would issue the create view command. Then you would do some actions on tables. In this case, it's joining two tables, the employee table and the persons table. And I'm going to do that now. I don't know why it keeps doing that. So I apparently already have a view. So, and to call a view, you would call it pretty much like you would call a table, and you get data back. And now you're thinking, well, where are these objects residing in my database? So if you go to your Object Explorer on the left side and open up that AdventureWorks 2016 database, you'll see your views are in the views folder. Your UDFs would be under programmability, functions, and then it breaks down into table view valued functions and scalar valued functions. There's some table valued functions there and some scalar valued functions there. And your stored procedures are also under programmability, but they're under the stored procedures folder. Let's see. Oh yeah. So if you want to download, I think I actually went over this already. The AdventureWorks database, it's on GitHub. If you want to download SSMS, either just Google SSMS. It'll eventually take you to this page. Just click the link. It'll download the installer. And Visual Studio, go to visualstudio.com, visualstudio.microsoft.com, and install that. And that's all I have for you guys. Thanks.